In the summer of 1976, a man walked into the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, sat down in the lobby, and refused to leave. His teenage son had just been denied an American student visa for the third time, despite a confirmed admission to UC Berkeley. So the father waited. When the American consul came back from lunch, he followed him into his private office and spent 20 minutes arguing for his son's future. The consul gave in. That son was Sanjay Mehrotra. 16 years later, the company he co-founded, SanDisk, was 3 weeks from running out of money, a product almost nobody had committed to buying, and a bank account draining by the day. He refused to let it die. Today, that same engineer runs Micron, a company worth over $700 billion, and the SD card he helped invent is sitting inside devices all over your house right now. This is how a boy from Kanpur, who was told no more times than most people could survive, built the medium the entire digital world runs on. Chapter 1. The Boy from Kanpur. To understand why a man would refuse to let a company die, you have to understand where his refusal to quit came from. It started in a city built on tanneries and cotton mills. Sanjay Mehrotra was born on June 27, 1958, in Kanpur, a gritty industrial city in northern India, known more for its factories than for producing Silicon Valley founders. He was the youngest of 4 children. His father was a liaison officer in the cotton industry, the kind of middle-class professional whose entire philosophy of parenting could be reduced to a single sentence: education is the only way out. When Sanjay was 10 years old, the family relocated to New Delhi. And that move mattered because New Delhi had better schools, better competition, and a higher ceiling for what an ambitious kid could imagine doing with his life. Mehrotra gravitated toward math and science with an intensity that his siblings and father actively encouraged. And by his teenage years, he had transferred to Sardar Patel Vidyalaya, one of the top-ranked secondary schools in the capital. He eventually enrolled at BITS Pilani, one of India's most prestigious engineering institutions, which at the time had an academic partnership with MIT and the Ford Foundation. His father's plan was always for Sanjay to continue his education in the United States. And so, when Mehrotra was 18, he applied to UC Berkeley. He got in. What happened next was the kind of story that defines a person for life. He was denied a U.S. student visa 3 times in a row, the third rejection coming in that summer of 1976, despite his confirmed Berkeley admission. We just heard how his father refused to accept that answer. What matters is the lesson Mehrotra took from it. He later said his father's behavior in that embassy taught him the foundational rule of his professional life. If you want success, start with tenacity. He would need every ounce of it. He arrived at Berkeley and earned both his bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering and computer science, graduating with a BS in 1978 and an MS in 1980. He went to work at Intel, then moved to Seek Technology, following a mentor named George Perligos, who had left Intel to found the startup. Then he moved to Integrated Device Technology. He was accumulating expertise in a very specific area: non-volatile memory design, the engineering problem of building chips that could store data for years without any external power supply. It was a narrow field in the early 1980s. It would not remain narrow for long. Chapter 2. 3 Immigrants and a Vision. In 1988, Mehrotra met Eli Harari, an Israeli-American engineer who had developed the floating gate EEPROM, a breakthrough that proved semiconductor-based storage was practically viable, reliable, and durable in ways that the industry hadn't fully accepted yet. Harari had a vision. Solid-state storage would eventually replace every spinning magnetic disk in every portable device ever made. He also knew Jack Yuan, a Taiwanese-American engineer who had worked with him years earlier at Hughes Aircraft. And so the 3 of them, an Israeli, an Indian, and a Taiwanese, sat down together and founded a company called SanDisk in Santa Clara, California, on June 1, 1988. The name is worth a moment. SanDisk, as it later became, is partially a portmanteau of the founder's name, Sanjay and Disk. But in 1988, they were still SanDisk, and the founding premise was almost provocatively ambitious for the era. Flash memory in 1988 was, as Eli Harari described it, slow, unreliable, and expensive. The company's entire existence was a bet that all three of those problems could be systematically solved. They set themselves up as what Harari called a virtual company. Almost no in-house manufacturing, very few employees, and a deliberate strategy of outsourcing fabrication so they could scale quickly once the technology was proven. Mehrotra took on engineering and product development. Harari handled the vision and the CEO role. UN provided the manufacturing and technical architecture expertise. They raised venture capital, developed technology relationships with AT&T Bell Laboratories and Matsushita Electronics, and began defining the memory chip architecture with Western Digital. In 1991, they achieved something genuinely historic. SanDisk produced the world's first flash-based solid-state drive in a standard 2.5-inch hard disk drive form factor. It held 20 megabytes. It cost approximately $1,000. And IBM agreed to put it in the ThinkPad 700T. That was the proof of concept, and it was real. But a proof of concept and a functioning business are not the same thing. And 1992 was about to test whether the gap between those two things would kill the company entirely. Speaking of a tiny piece of tech that quietly outsmarts the big expensive players, that's exactly what pulled someone on our team to the Pulse R8 Smart Ring. It reads your heart rate, your sleep, and your workouts right from your finger. A week on a charge, 100 days with the case, and it's fully waterproof. The surprise was the price. Under $40, a fraction of the big-name rings, because it comes direct instead of through the retailers that mark everything up. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Because in 1992, this company came within 3 weeks of dying completely. Chapter 3. The 1992 Crisis. 3 weeks from zero. In 1992, SanDisk nearly ceased to exist. The company had a product. It had technology. It had OEM agreements with IBM, Tandy, HP, NCR, Fujitsu, AT&T, and Sharp. In its first full year of product sales, it had moved $20 million worth of solid-state storage devices. By every external measure, SanDisk looked like a company that was making progress. The problem was the burn rate. Building and selling the world's first commercial flash storage products required capital at a pace that the company's early revenues simply couldn't match. The technology development was expensive. The manufacturing arrangements with Matsushita's Kyushu foundry in Japan required substantial upfront commitments. And the market, while real, was still forming. Enterprise customers were interested. Consumer demand was theoretical. The cash position deteriorated to a point where the company's survival was being measured in weeks, not quarters. 3 weeks, to be precise. And then the money would be gone, the patents would be sold off, and the SD card you use today would have belonged to someone else, or to no one. What happened in those final weeks is the reason any of the rest of this story exists. Because two things landed at almost exactly the same moment. The first was a technology licensing relationship with Matsushita that provided critical revenue and manufacturing access. The second was an approach from Seagate Technology, at the time one of the world's largest hard drive manufacturers, whose chairman Al Shugart had become convinced that flash memory was the future of portable storage and wanted equity exposure before anyone else understood what they were looking at. In December 1992, Seagate signed a letter of intent to invest approximately $20 million in SanDisk for a 25% equity stake, with Shugart himself taking a newly created seat on the SanDisk board. That infusion didn't just save the company from immediate insolvency, it validated the entire thesis to the broader market. If the chairman of Seagate Technology was willing to bet $20 million on a small flash memory startup, then flash memory was something that serious people needed to pay attention to. Mehrotra's role during this period was to keep engineering moving regardless of what was happening on the financing side. He held 70 patents in non-volatile memory design, many of them foundational to enabling high-capacity flash, and that intellectual property portfolio was not incidental to the company's survival. It was the reason anyone was willing to write a check. The patents were the moat, the engineering was the moat, and Mehrotra was the one building both. Chapter 4. Building the Standard, Compact Flash, and the SD Card. Having survived 1992, SanDisk spent the next several years doing something that most nearly bankrupt startups are temperamentally incapable of. They played a long game. Instead of trying to monetize every product immediately, Mehrotra and the team focused on building the technical standards that would define the entire flash memory industry. And when you define the standard, you collect a royalty from everyone who builds to it. In 1994, SanDisk introduced the compact flash format, the first successful memory card standard. Compact flash outpaced every competing early format, miniature card, smart media, and became the dominant storage medium for digital cameras, professional photography, and early mobile computing for most of the following decade. The format was based on NOR flash technology, and it moved fast, earning a reputation as the fastest flash memory format commercially available. It was SanDisk's design, and SanDisk collected licensing fees every time someone else built to it. In 1995, SanDisk officially renamed itself SanDisk and listed on the NASDAQ under the ticker SNDK, selling 16 million shares at $10 per share. The company was now public, and the name change was a statement. This was no longer a startup betting its survival on a single product category. This was a company building a platform. The platform got dramatically larger in 1999, when Panasonic and Toshiba approached SanDisk to co-develop a new memory card format. They were worried about Sony's proprietary memory stick gaining dominance, and they needed an open standard with industry backing. SanDisk brought its expertise in card controller design and multi-level cell technology. Toshiba brought its manufacturing process. Panasonic brought its consumer electronics distribution. And together they created the secure digital card, the SD card, which was formally introduced in August 1999 and would go on to become the most widely deployed removable storage format in human history. The same year, Mehrotra initiated and guided what would become one of the most consequential strategic alliances in the semiconductor industry. A 50-50 manufacturing joint venture with Toshiba, beginning operations at Toshiba's Yokkaichi fab in Japan in January 2000. The partnership would last 17 years, spanning 8 generations of flash technology development, and it gave SanDisk something that no other non-manufacturing flash company had: guaranteed access to world-class production capacity at cost. Chapter 5. The Samsung Threat: Refusing a $5.85 billion offer. By 2008, SanDisk had built itself into the world's largest supplier of flash storage card products. But the flash memory business was structurally brutal. Boom and bust cycles driven by supply and demand imbalances that could swing a company from enormous profitability to heavy losses within a single fiscal year. And in 2008, the industry was in one of its deepest busts, compounded by the global financial crisis and a severe oversupply problem. SanDisk's stock, which had traded at over $60 per share, had collapsed. And in May 2008, Samsung Electronics, the South Korean giant that was already SanDisk's largest patent licensee, approached the company with an acquisition proposal. The initial indication of interest valued SanDisk at approximately $28.75 per share. By September, Samsung made it public. They were offering $26 per share in cash, a deal that would have valued SanDisk at approximately $5.85 billion. Eli Harari, still CEO at the time, turned it down, unanimously. The board's letter to Samsung stated that the offer significantly undervalued the company given its long-term prospects, called it opportunistically timed at the trough of an industry-wide downturn, and noted it represented a 55% discount to SanDisk's 52-week high. Samsung's offer was rejected in full, Samsung eventually walked away, and the flash memory industry's next recovery proved the board right. SanDisk's long-term value was not $5.85 billion. This moment is important because of what it reveals about the culture Harari and Mehrotra had built. A company that had been 3 weeks from zero in 1992 was now confident enough, architecturally strong enough in its patent portfolio and manufacturing relationships to look at a $5.85 billion offer and say, the number isn't big enough. That is not a decision a company makes from fear. That is a decision a company makes from a very specific kind of institutional conviction about what the technology is ultimately worth. Chapter 6. Mehrotra takes the wheel. Eli Harari stepped down as CEO in 2010 after 22 years. He had taken the company from 3 founders and a virtual office in Santa Clara to a global flash technology giant. And the person who took over was the man who had been there since the beginning, who held 70 patents, who had guided the Toshiba joint venture, who had survived 1992 alongside him. Sanjay Mehrotra was named president and CEO in 2011. What Mehrotra inherited was a company at an inflection point. The consumer flash business, SD cards, USB drives, memory cards for cameras, was maturing. Margins were compressing, and the next wave of growth was going to come from enterprise storage, data centers, servers, the infrastructure that was beginning to be called the cloud. If SanDisk was going to remain relevant, it needed to move up the stack from being a component supplier to being a systems provider. Mehrotra moved methodically. In May 2011, SanDisk acquired Pliant Technology for its SSD controller expertise. In February 2012, it acquired FlashSoft for PCIe flash caching software. In July 2013, it acquired Smart Storage Systems for enterprise SSDs and FlashD IMMs at $307 million. And then in June 2014, Mehrotra made his largest and most consequential move, a definitive agreement to acquire Fusion.io for $1.1 billion in cash. Fusion.io was the market leader in high-performance PCIe flash cards for enterprise and hyperscale data centers. Apple, Facebook, and dozens of the world's largest technology companies were running their most demanding workloads on Fusion.io hardware. The acquisition gave SanDisk an immediate enterprise presence, a world-class engineering team, and a set of customer relationships that would have taken years to build organically. Under Mehrotra's leadership between 2011 and 2016, SanDisk's revenues grew from roughly $3.5 billion to $6.6 billion. The company moved from a Fortune 500 company in name to a Fortune 500 company in the full enterprise sense of what that means. A diversified portfolio of products, a patent licensing business generating hundreds of millions annually, a 17-year manufacturing joint venture with Toshiba, and a position at the center of the infrastructure that every major technology company was building. Chapter 7. The $19 billion exit and the Western Digital. In October 2015, Western Digital announced its intention to acquire SanDisk Corporation for $19 billion. It was, at the time, one of the largest acquisitions in the history of the technology industry, and it was almost perfectly timed from a strategic standpoint for both parties. Western Digital was the world's second-largest hard drive manufacturer, and it could see exactly what was coming. Solid-state drives were going to eat into hard disk drive revenue in ways that could not be hedged internally. Acquiring SanDisk gave WD instant access to the world's second-largest flash manufacturing capacity, a patent portfolio comprising over 1,500 patents and licensing agreements generating substantial annual royalties, the Toshiba joint venture, and the brand equity of one of the most recognized names in consumer storage. For Mehrotra, the deal represented the closing of a 28-year arc that had begun with 3 engineers, a virtual office, and an idea about what semiconductor storage could eventually become. The company that had been days from insolvency in 1992, that had rejected a $5.85 billion Samsung acquisition offer in 2008, that had invented the compact flash format and co-created the SD card, that had built a 17-year manufacturing partnership with Toshiba, was now being acquired for $19 billion by Western Digital. The acquisition closed on May 12, 2016. Mehrotra joined Western Digital's board after the transaction closed to help oversee the integration, but stepped down in February 2017. What came next was, in retrospect, the logical continuation of a pattern that defined his entire career: being recruited to lead something that needed to be rebuilt. Chapter 8. Micron and the Second Act. In April 2017, Micron Technology named Sanjay Mehrotra as its president and CEO, effective May 8, 2017. Micron was one of the world's leading semiconductor memory companies and one of only 3 companies globally capable of manufacturing DRAM and NAND flash at scale. It was also a company that had struggled to define itself strategically at a moment when artificial intelligence was beginning to transform the economics of every memory technology it produced. Mehrotra arrived with a thesis. Memory was no longer a commodity business. In an AI-driven world, the speed, capacity, and architecture of memory chips would become one of the primary determinants of computational performance. That meant Micron needed to move from being a manufacturer of undifferentiated chips to being a provider of memory solutions tuned for specific, high-value applications. He initiated investment programs in high-bandwidth memory and committed Micron to expanding domestic manufacturing under the CHIPS and Science Act, with announced investments in new fabrication facilities in Idaho and New York. He was elected chair of the Semiconductor Industry Association in 2019. He was inducted into the National Academy of Engineering in 2022. He received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Flash Memory Summit in 2019 for, as the citation read, co-founding SanDisk, advancing the architecture that enabled the industry and market for flash memory and leadership of Micron technology. By early 2026, Micron's market capitalization had approached $768 billion, a number that requires some context to fully appreciate. The cotton industry liaison officer from Kanpur, who spent 20 minutes in an embassy office arguing for his teenage son's visa, had, indirectly and across decades, helped produce one of the most valuable companies in the history of the semiconductor industry. Chapter 9. What Sanjay Mehrotra actually built. The conventional telling of the SanDisk story focuses on the products: the SD card in your camera, the thumb drive on your keychain, the SSD in your laptop. And those products are real. But the deeper story is about the architecture that made the company survivable across decades of cyclical volatility, competitive pressure, and existential crises. The first element of that architecture was the patent portfolio. From the earliest days, Mehrotra and Harari understood that in a commodity technology business, the only sustainable competitive advantage was intellectual property. They filed aggressively. They built a licensing program that eventually generated hundreds of millions of dollars annually from competitors including Samsung, the same company that had tried to acquire them at a discount in 2008. Mehrotra himself holds over 70 patents, many of them foundational to multi-level cell NAND flash architecture. The second element was the manufacturing partnership. The 17-year joint venture with Toshiba at the Yokkaichi fab in Japan was not a simple supply agreement. It was a structural alliance that gave SanDisk guaranteed access to leading-edge manufacturing capacity without having to build or own the fabs directly. That meant SanDisk could invest its capital in design, software, and systems rather than in the billions of dollars required to construct semiconductor fabrication plants. The partnership spanned 8 generations of flash technology development and produced the manufacturing volume that made SanDisk competitive against vertically integrated giants. The third element, and the one that explains 1992, was the refusal to define the company by its current product. In 1992, flash memory in portable electronics was speculative. The market didn't fully exist. What SanDisk was selling was a vision of what storage would eventually look like, and the Seagate investment validated that vision at the exact moment it was about to run out of money. Mehrotra's contribution to that survival was the credibility of the technology itself. The patents, the engineering, the proof that the thing actually worked, and the discipline to keep building even when the financing was terrifying. Sanjay Mehrotra was denied entry to the United States 3 times before his father refused to accept the answer. And in a very real sense, the entire trajectory of flash memory storage runs through that 20-minute conversation in a New Delhi embassy office. The man from Kanpur didn't just build a company. He built the medium that the digital world runs on. So now we would love to hear from you. Was the $19 billion SanDisk exit the real legacy, or is what Mehrotra is building at Micron the chapter that actually matters? We look forward to your discussion in the comments. Global Status exists entirely to tell those stories. If that is the kind of story you want more of, like this video, hit subscribe below, turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next one.